Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard. I went from being a lawyer and partner at one of the largest firms in America to becoming an online personality and successful entrepreneur. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your health and personal life. So, how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you chase joy while achieving success? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back to Hustle and Flow. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and I have a very exciting guest today because it is going to lead us to a super exciting reveal next week. But today's guest is my creative director for my rebrand, Jasmine Haitalani. She is the marketing and creative director of Highflier Powerhouse, a creative agency that specializes in guiding service-based entrepreneurs through rebranding and creative direction. With a focus on helping brands stand out in their industries and become the number one in their niche, Jasmine brings an untraditional approach to creativity and marketing. She is also the host of the fabulous podcast, Brand Your Way to a Million, where she shares insights and success stories from the world of branding. Her agency offers two signature services, the Rebrand Experience and Sales Studio. Jasmine, thanks so much for coming on Hustle and Flow.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for the conversation we'll be having today and maybe even teasing some parts of what's to come.
Yes. So share with everybody a little bit about your background, because I think it's really interesting how you went from, which a lot of us have done, how you went from corporate to more personal branding related to entrepreneurs. So if you'll just share a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am actually completely self-taught. I went into school for biology. I was supposed to be on my way to med school. And kind of towards the end of my junior year, I decided that that wasn't necessarily the path I wanted to pursue. And that's actually when I got my, first branding experience with Kendra Scott. Kendra Scott is a billion-dollar jewelry brand based in Texas, for those of you that don't know. And that really taught me, really opened up the world of personal branding before we know it as what it is today. Because kind of this business that created so much money was based around one person and her ideology and her methods and kind of what contributed to her success. And so much of that was taught to us even as like employees and how we trained and how we, again, like we're fulfilling our role in the day-to-day of corporate. So fast forward into the pandemic, my roles was one of the roles that got furloughed. And so I was already kind of teasing out going into the branding world and starting my own business. So that was kind of the perfect time for me to double down on that. And kind of 6 months later, when things started to open back up again, I decided to just continue and pursue my business. And that's what kind of made it to what it is today, where now I help so many coaches and service providers really brand themselves online through content, through marketing, through obviously brand visuals, and so much more.
I love that you came from Kendra Scott. I was trying to think, she was one of my back in 2016, she was like a brand sponsor where
Mm.
she actually provided lots of jewelry and gifts to the retreat attendees because I was promoting entrepreneurs and personal brands. And so it was a fun story to tell. And I used her for so long, really as an example of really how to lean into that. And so I love that that's part of your background. What do you see as the biggest difference between, because obviously it's a huge company. I mean, it's grown a lot, but
Mhm.
what's the biggest difference between the bigger corporate branding versus an entrepreneur that's like more of like a service-based smaller business?
Yeah, and I think people think it's all about size. And if you have a team and if you have employees, then maybe you're not necessarily, it's harder for you to become a personal brand. But I think you can be a small business and still not be a personal brand. For example, you can have an agency or a coaching business where your focus is more on the community versus you as the individual. So I like to think about if you are trying to position yourself as a personal brand, it's more about how well your community can see your values, your philosophies, almost like that important part of the entrepreneurial side of
Mhm.
you. How well can they see that embedded in your day-to-day marketing, in your offers, in your onboarding experience, in the way that you deliver your services? So I think it's a lot more about that versus just front facing, again, the size of a business.
So, what do you think are the biggest mistakes that the service-based businesses that are personal brands, what are the biggest mistakes that you see them making in branding right now?
I think number one is playing it too safe. I think there's a lot of things out there that are obviously teaching you success recipes and formulas and how to with content and making sure that you're sticking to like this box. And I think so many people obviously are seeing other successful people in their niche online that are like, that's working for them. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to also use those colors. I'm also going to follow this design. I'm also going to work on I'm going to make my content templates just like theirs. And then they're wondering why they're not achieving the same results or maybe even dreading that creation process because it's
Mhm.
not yours to begin with. So I think they're playing it too safe instead of actually getting creative themselves, being the visionary, which I know me and you have talked about throughout your own rebrand process, but like putting yourself out there enough to rediscover like who you are, who you want to be online, and like what it's going to take to attract your circle and like your community of people. And maybe even like starting to create your own success recipe. And maybe even like to that point, like understanding, okay, there are things out there that probably work to some extent, but I don't need to copy and paste this to find my version of what success is. So I'm seeing a lot of copycat duplicates. And I think that's also what makes people say, hey, I've seen this before, or it makes you very comparable to somebody else versus when you're doing something so unique, someone's like, ah, that's the person I've been looking for, or I haven't seen it said in that way before. I haven't seen it done in that way, which immediately like brings someone's attention over.
So, when I'm working with people on strategy, a lot of times when we start talking about their positioning and what makes them unique, they're like, I don't know. Or they'll tell me things that actually aren't unique, like they're very standard for their industry. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like on the creative side, how do you really pull out for people or just ways for that you encourage them to find what makes them unique? Because we're all unique. There is not a person on this planet that is not unique.
I think it comes down to a couple of different things. So obviously, we do ask our clients, straightforward and kind of what you mentioned, which is like, okay, what are specific things that you think you have to offer that nobody else in your industry is offering at the moment? I also like to think about what are people's perception of that, the people that have worked with you, because
Mm.
so many times we are just in our own bubble. But it's the clients that have worked with us the longest. There's usually a reason why they're continuing to pay us, continuing to work with us, refer us with maybe no referral bonus or anything like that. It's because they're usually seeing something that maybe we brush off as normal or we brush off thinking everyone else is doing this. But I like to really think about like third party perception into how that's brought in. And I like to think about that because in an ideal world, that's how we want our audience who doesn't know us to immediately make that connection. We want them to
Mhm.
immediately see that that's the thing that makes us stand out. So if it's something that your clients that have already been with you and paid you, if that's something that they're seeing so clearly, how can we make sure that we're now translating that to the audience? So it's also mixing, okay, what is your client seeing that you're not? What do you think is unique? And then also sometimes, we even ask clients, what do you actually think is missing? And most of the time, they're very clear on what that is, but they just don't know what it looks like. So, for example,
Mm.
they know, I know my brand isn't consistent right now, or something about my brand is not making me feel confident because of this specific factor, right? And maybe they don't know what the solution to that looks like or how to fix that, but this is where we come in and kind of fill in all the gaps from all sorts
Mhm.
of parts of the strategy.
And then what do you think about, because another thing that I hear a lot is like they'll say, well, this is who I am, but I can't be like that, or I can't show up that way for this particular client or this particular audience, which I never agree with. But I am curious about your perspective. How do you deal with that when they feel as though perhaps their audience is not exactly the same as them personally, and that they would be offended or not as impressed or fear that they're not credible enough if they showed up a little bit more authentically.
This is such a good question because I think one of the main things that I see consistently is whenever someone applies to work with us, that it's usually, oh, I've seen so and so in your portfolio, or I've seen that you did work for X, or I've seen your work for this, but I'm not them. I love what you did for them, but I'm not that person. I'm worried that this is going to be too much, too curated, too high end, too luxurious. And I'm not like that. I don't do that on a day-to-day basis. I'm not always wearing makeup with my hair done. I'm usually in sweats when I'm recording my podcast episodes. Or to that point, like I'm worried that my audience won't understand this shift. And I think this comes down to two things. Number one, most of the time, the process in which we help you kind of figure out like who you are isn't that far off from what you think. It's actually that who you are or like how we're trying to represent that visually. It's usually that that's actually there more than you realize. It's there where you feel safe. It's there with maybe friends and family, with team members you talk with consistently, with clients in your Zoom room. But maybe you don't feel that way when you're speaking to a cold audience or people that you don't necessarily have a connection with. So I actually think it's more authentic when you translate who you are behind the scenes to, publicly, because that's the most ethical way that you can bring buyers into your like coaching offer, your services. Because and then at that point, what they're seeing online is what they're buying into. So, for example, for you, people want to come to your retreats because they see who you are online is represented as who they're going to see in that retreat experience. If they see something different, that's where they will feel mistrust, they will feel thrown off, they'll feel like, I didn't know this person. So I think that's number one. Number two, it's also thinking about how can you bring your audience along that journey and that experience, even as you're discovering what that looks like for you. So I can say, okay, you want a luxurious brand, and that means so many different things to so many different people. For some people, luxury is materialistic items. For some people, it's vacations. For some people, it's time off and to spend with their family and their kids. For some people, luxury is literally just being able to work from home and, be in sweats and all the things. So there are so many different definitions for what one singular adjective is actually like and how it's represented. So along that journey, we really like to encourage clients to kind of showcase that process to their audience and maybe even let them in and connect with them. And I'm like, when is the last time you shared how you got here, what your story is like, why you're making this change, right? Most of the time, when people, again, want this visual direction and shift, most of the time it's because they know what people are seeing and who I am aren't like clicking. Something is disconnected. And
Mhm.
so taking your audience along that journey of like now is the perfect time to kind of reset the tone and introduce them to who you really are.
So that's a great segue into when is the right time? Well, there's two really. When is the right time to brand to begin with? And then when is the right time to rebrand?
Mm. So I think currently in today's market, you have to have some sort of brand originally to start off. I think a couple of years ago, even when I started, people could get away with iPhone selfies. Websites were definitely just not necessary at all. You can just have things on Instagram. People will just DM you. The trust factor was pretty low. And people were just, again, just because of how marketing works, the algorithm, you can see people's content more consistently. So you can get away with a lot of non-existent branding material. But now I really think there's no excuse to why you can't have the basics. There are so many templates, kits, low, investments, tutorials, so many things that could help you get started. Even just you going on Pinterest and coming up with some sort of mood board as a starting point. If you have $0 in the account right now, I think that is just a good place for you to start differentiating yourself and actually learning what you like and what you don't like. This is something that even me as a creative, I had to go through and decide like, okay, here's my original direction. Okay, I'm shifting that because I'm realizing things are shifting with myself, which brings me to, okay, now when do you decide like you want to officially rebrand? I think when you officially rebrand are usually like four criterias that I kind of touch on with my clients. Number one is you feel like your audience and your community is genuinely disengaged from you. Everything that you've been putting out, they are just not resonating with from a marketing standpoint, from a content standpoint, even though you've shifted your messaging, your positioning, all of that, something still isn't clicking. Number two, your sales are stagnant or declining despite you posting more, launching twice as hard, doing again more sales work, but still something again isn't clicking. Number three, your offer suite has fundamentally changed. So I always say that you can again change the messaging and the positioning and the copy and all of that. But if there's no visual change to come through with that, people will continue to see that offer as the previous version of it. So if you're massively trying to change your offer suite, that's another place. And then the fourth thing is you're trying to pivot into a new niche. You're trying to widen your audience. You're trying to attract a different type of clientele or maybe the same clientele, but expanding even further on that. So you're realizing, okay, what I have is not necessarily equivalent to who I'm trying to attract.
And for those listening and curious about the rebrand and kind of like how I fit into that, very similar. I mean, for those of you who've been around, you know that I went on the sabbatical and then I came back, and a lot of my assets were from when I did the original branding in 2017. And, or I guess that technically was a rebrand, but that was the brand that so many people knew for so long. And that was 2017. My retreat photos were from 2016. A lot of just other photos were older. And I started playing around with new colors. I started playing around with new fonts, but I really wasn't sure how much I was coming back into the business and what to do with it. And then when I decided, okay, I know what I'm doing again, I'm ready to get reset. And I'm really trying to position myself for the book deal and to grow it in different ways. That was when I said, okay, it's time to go all in on a rebrand, because for me in 2026, my entire, like, my main goal is to grow the audience and to really position it for the book deal and launch that would potentially come out in 2027 or 2028. So that is why I hired Jasmine, because I was like, it is time. And it's so interesting, and I'm curious from your perspective, Jasmine. I thought I had gotten a lot of clarity. I was like, I know what we're doing. Let's do the rebrand. But even as I was working through the rebrand, I got even more clarity. Offers changed in
Yep.
doing the copy and doing the rebrand. It really does shine a light and bring a lot of clarity. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, one, do you see that a lot? And two, why do you think that is, if so?
Yeah, I think I get a lot of positive feedback around how just the questionnaire pre-work process is very much like the self-discovery. And I think this mainly happens because most of the time when we are trying to seek clarity beforehand, and this is why we tell clients, like, even if you're not 100% sure of the vision, that's not your role. And even if you're not super clear on what changes you want to make, again, that's not your role. Like, this is where our process will help you discover that. Because most of the time when you're thinking about this yourself, number one, maybe sometimes you're not asking yourself the right questions. Two, I think you're only being able to look at what you see in front of you and what you know. And maybe you're only looking at one specific area, like how would I want my website to look? What do I want my content to be? What do I want my colors? What photo shoot do I want to do? And you're looking at these individual pieces versus when you sit down through this kind of like self-discovery phase, you're really sitting, number one, you're sitting down in an area where you are dedicating time to solely thinking about this. You're not thinking about it in the shower. You're not thinking about it in between calls. You're not thinking about it late at night. You're dedicating a specific time to sit and think about those things. And next, you're obviously being asked a very specific set of questions, but you're also being able to, in that one sitting, look at the big picture. You're being able to see, oh, wait, I just said that I want to attract this type of person, but now I'm filling out my offer and something is disconnected. Something doesn't make sense. Or, oh, now that I'm seeing that this is kind of the brand feeling and this is kind of the direction I want to go with my brand, this type of copy or this type of thing doesn't make sense here. So this is what allows you to kind of self-reflect on all of the moving parts. And then this is where you're able to kind of catch yourself in that process and say, oh, I might need to change this. I might need to make this decision differently. I might need to do that differently and kind of go about that process.
I also think, even like with the photo shoot, with each piece, it's as if you step into the energy more. So for a long time, it was like the rebrand was an idea of what was going to happen, even though it was a reflection of where I was already going. Doing some of those things actually got me in the energy of already being there.
Mhm.
So the website is not out yet. The logo, the right, that stuff's not out yet, but I'm already living into it, which is what I want to ask next. When you start living into that energy, but it's not ready yet, right? Like
Mhm.
there's this gap. How do you recommend people go about that launch? Like, do you just trickle it out? Do you do a launch? I mean, I know what I'm doing, but I'm curious for others because you're in that gap space, right? Like where you're ready to go, but you've still got the old assets. And I've definitely had a tendency of like, well, I'm not going to do anything, but you were like, don't do that. So I'm um I'm just curious how you recommend approaching that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I really feel like, to your point, the photo shoot experience is the first like real life in-person representation of what's happening. Everything else is just on a digital screen and you're looking at files and things on your computer. But when it comes to the reveal, I think it's to that point, like playing up what works best for you and your audience. And I know the kind of the most exciting time is when you've seen kind of that first round and now you're like, okay, I just have to wait for this to finish. And meanwhile, I already know what direction I'm headed in next. So I think it's like pouring that energy into the reveal strategy, but pouring that energy also into like the strategy you're going to be using in your marketing ahead. Like you can already be creating content ahead of time for an upcoming launch that you want to tie into the rebrand reveal. You can be tying, again, a specific content series that you want to put out. I think, again, this is such a good time to retrain your audience and set the standard for like, hey, here's what to expect from my account, from my brand moving forward. And instead of having this energy kind of piled up with nowhere to go, it's kind of like being able to like create again the components that will go out in the not even really near future, but it's like sooner than you think. And it's also bringing your audience along into that journey of like, hey, I'm so excited because this is finally happening. This is why it's so important. And like teasing out your emotions and your feelings. And even if there's a way that you can involve them in the process, I always tell clients like maybe they can vote on things. You can do something exclusive for your email list to grow your list and at the same time give them exclusive like sneak peeks and looks. So getting to your community to feel like they're part of that process can be really exciting for them too. So it's not just about you and your visuals, but your audience feels like they had a part of it too.
From your perspective, what are the best rebrands? Like when you think of like all your clients, it does it turn into the actual visual? Does it turn into the way that they approach it? Like what really sets apart those who get the rebrand and those who really like you're just like, wow, I love what they're doing with this.
hmm I think to that point, like how much of a visionary you can be and take this even further than just the reveal portion. So, I always say the ones that have the most successful rebrand, number one, they're going into the process being fairly open-minded and like ready for change, right? This is what a rebrand is. We're not just tweaking some colors or changing a copy point and maybe like shifting your messaging. We're like really kind of changing it all in like the best way possible. So then it's to that point, you mentioned having like this energy and this excitement. So how much of that can you continue to pour into this new direction? Not just when the reveal happens, but I love seeing rebrands 6 months down the line being like, oh my God, they're still coming up with such creative ideas and amazing content and great marketing and enrolling their ideal clients into their offers because that work that we did gave them the clarity, they gave them the direction as well, and now you feel like you have something new to play with and you know how to be consistent and cohesive. I think when
Hmm.
you don't have that original direction, you have those ideas, but you aren't sure how much of a spark they can create and how consistent you can be because all of the other puzzle pieces are maybe misaligned versus now you're like, "Oh, I know just the idea and I know what my clients would want from this and I know how to translate it into visual." So then you feel more confident continuing to show up with new ideas, creative ideas. It's almost like a dopamine hit that you can continue to like leverage.
I'm the same way. For those, I was going to say, for those of the people who, but oh, I would say those of us, for those of us who have like lots of ideas and we love to be creative and we're constantly changing things up and we think like, oh, I'm Taylor Swift with a new album with brand new colors and fonts and themes all the time, who like maybe want to rebrand every year or every 3 years. How do you recommend that people? Well, one, like the importance of having a true set brand that's
Mhm.
not changing all the time, but
Mhm.
two, how you can still play and be flexible within your branding.
Yeah, I think all of the good rebrands should last you, like I said, a good amount of time before one of those pivotal things start to happen that I mentioned earlier, which is a sign for you to rebrand. But I think people don't often talk about like a brand refresh, which is something that we're actually going to start doing for clients behind the scenes. And a refresh is something where you actually just freshen up a portion of your brand. So maybe you just adjust like the colors and the fonts. Maybe you're just getting a new photo shoot done. You're updating some sort of like execution piece to keep your brand up to date. This doesn't necessarily mean we're doing, again, the whole restructuring, but this is actually what allows you to have your brand long term. So, for example, I think about some clients that have rebranded with us almost 3, 4 years ago. Now they're like, okay, I still love my brand so much, but I just want to update some like new assets. I want to freshen up my content. I want to freshen up the way that I'm implementing things based on what's currently out there, what's trending, what's resonating. And so that's when like kind of a brand refresh comes up. But I think this is where people make the mistake of trying to freshen up their brand and they try to just do the photo shoot or they just try to change their colors or just try to change their fonts when they don't have the original foundation. So they do that and they're like, well, wait, I still don't like it or something still is off or I'm putting these new pictures with my old website and something isn't clicking. Versus when you freshen up with like this foundation of a rebrand, we know, okay, this is what Heather likes. This is the direction that we went in the first time. Here's how we can step it up. So even though I would say like if we're comparing Taylor Swift's albums, each album is completely different, which is I think what is considered a rebrand. But in terms of like them always being associated with who Taylor is or how Taylor chooses to reveal those albums and all the little details she puts in between and the new ideas she consistently comes up with for each album is probably the refresh portion.
I love it. I love it. I always love to bring in a Taylor Swift analogy, especially when it comes to, to branding and marketing.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts before we go? It's interesting, and we'll share this little secret with everyone. We're actually recording this before the rebrand is complete. So, Jasmine and I don't yet know what the final product is going to look like. So, I'm not actually giving you much of the reveal. It's coming next week by the time this episode comes out. The reveal is coming the week after. But anything that you want to touch upon or share, Jasmine, before we head out related to this audience or the rebrand in general?
Yeah, I think so many people actually fear the rebrand process because of how much is involved, how transformational it can be. Like I mentioned, you're taking everything and flipping it upside down. And I think so many people wait too long before taking action and they think that they're just going to wake up one day and all of the answers are going to come to them. They're going to have all the clarity. And even like you mentioned, you had some clarity, which ended up changing as you were going through the process. So for anyone out there that is even just curious or remotely like thinking about a rebrand, maybe you're gonna see Heather's rebrand, feel so excited and be like, how can I even just get started with this process? To that point, start just listening to episodes like this, start building your knowledge, having conversations on what the process actually looks like so that you also are being familiar with what kind of clarity you should work towards. My podcast is obviously a great example of this, but in general, thinking about what is the first step that you can start taking instead of thinking about like the whole staircase.
I love it. Well, for those of you who are like, I could use a rebrand, or you just want to learn more about Jasmine, by the way, like you can learn so much just from listening to her podcast. We will put all of the show notes to the podcast, her website, her email, all the things. If you want to learn from her, check her out and maybe do a rebrand yourself. Jasmine, thank you so much for coming on the show and for being the creative genius behind my rebrand.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for the final reveal.
Me too. All right, everyone, we will see you next week with the reveal of the rebrand. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, give the episode a like and leave a comment below so we can keep the conversation going. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a future episode or announcement. Listening on Apple, Spotify, or another podcast app, you can watch the video and join in the after show conversation by visiting hustleandflowpodcast.com.